Hey there, internet friends, and welcome to That D Plus Show. Class is in session for the only show from that nerdy site that lets you know what kind of quality to expect right from the name. I'm your host, Trevor Starkey, and each week we sit down with guests to talk about a Disney Plus offering of their choosing. This show is made possible entirely by the support of our patrons over at patreon.com/thatnerdysite, so if you like the show and can support us over there, we would definitely appreciate it. But if you can't, no big deal. The fact that you're listening is awesome, and of course we would love it if you like, subscribe, rate, review, and share the podcast with your friends. Joining me today, nobody. I'm doing another solo episode here because I wanted to talk this week about DuckTales The Movie, Treasure of the Lost Lamp. This is so I've been watching a lot of the new 2017 version of DuckTales because we've got a few people that have wanted to talk about that series that I'm going to be reaching out to soon, I promise. And this is basically me forcing my hand to try and bring those people on sooner than later. But in watching that and watching through the two seasons of that are on Disney Plus, I wanted to circle back to my strongest memories of the original DuckTales series. I don't remember too much in the way of the original TV show that aired from I want to say 1987 to 1990. I definitely remember I would have been watching it at the time. But my strongest memories are tied to DuckTales the movie here because we had the VHS copy of it, and I'm sure my sister and I watched this movie over and over and over again in the early 90s, most likely until we got Aladdin, because it wasn't until I went back and rewatched this with like adult kind of context in it that I'm like, oh, this is very much just what they would do with Aladdin, Disney's Aladdin a couple years later, is what you have in DuckTales the movie. It is very much an Aladdin type story. You've got a genie, you've got a lamp, but it's the DuckTales gang interacting with them, and notably the voice of the genie is Rip Taylor in this instead of obviously Robin Williams there in Aladdin. But it's still striking to see the same kind of idea of like, we're going to bring in a comedian to come and play the genie and, be the wacky kind of character there. Interesting to see that the stage set for that here a couple of years prior to Disney's Aladdin. So that's kind of why I wanted to sit down and re-watch this movie. I've been loving the DuckTales series the 2017 DuckTales series, and I very much look forward to bringing on some guests to talk about that series in the coming weeks. But I wanted to revisit kind of my original, or the strongest memories I have of the original DuckTales series. So that's kind of why I picked this one. And then the reason it's just me is I've been busy with all sorts of work stuff, and I didn't want to bug anybody or bring anybody else into this one. So it's just kind of like I sat down and watched it a couple nights ago and was like, I can crank out another episode. Don't need to bring anybody else in to talk about this one, because it is so specifically tied to like my own personal childhood memories. History lesson for you. It was originally released August 3rd, 1990 is when this movie came out. Other notable releases of the time, you had a month earlier, on July 6th, 1990, you had The Jetsons movie, or Jetsons the Movie, which was another staple in my childhood home. I think in particular that both of those two movies were picked up. My sister won like a shopping spree from Bash's, which is a local grocery store chain here in Phoenix, or in the Phoenix area. And my sister won like you have 1 minute to get as much as you want. And this was back when they had like the movie, or they had like a movie section where you could buy, a lot of times it was like direct to video movies or direct to VHS kind of movies in that, and basically this is where my parents directed her to go. They said, just grab every movie you can off of that little those little shelves and stuff in the 1 minute you have. Put those in your cart, because it was a very supermarket sweep kind of thing, where it was like you have a limited number of time and you can go and grab whatever you want. My sister was 4 or 5 at this time or something like that, and so she would have basically just gotten as much as she could, and so there was no point in sending her back to like the meats, which is what you would always see in Supermarket Sweep. But I'm pretty sure Jetsons the movie, like Flintstones animated movie or something like that, and DuckTales the movie here. Pretty sure those were all within that hall alongside. I specifically remember like all of the Mary Kate and Ashley Olsen mystery detective like videos that we had. We had a ton of those that we would watch growing up. So very very like personal kind of like memories tied to that, and I'm pretty sure that was how we ended up with some of these movies. So Jetsons the movie coming out a month before that, I was like, that checks out. One that I've not seen but I know by its revered reputation is My Neighbor Totoro. Came out July 13th 1990. So and that's something that I definitely would not have put in this era. So kudos to that animation, because I think that was way ahead of its time, because I think of that as like a more modern animated film, just because I don't have the historical context of anime like that. But those jumped out at me as a couple of the movies of the time. The runtime of this, it's a brisk hour and 14 minutes. This was in the Disney timeline. This was their first movie of 1990. It came out after The Little Mermaid, November 17th, 1989, and then before The Rescuers Down Under in November 16th, 1990. So that is where this movie falls in the Disney timeline of things. And I've got a couple little trivia notes tied to that a little bit later. Roll call. So who's who in this film? The director, you had Bob Hathcock, who notably jumped out to me as he had directed 13 episodes of the series Pac-Man in 1982, which I did not even know was a TV series, but apparently Pac-Man was all the rage, and so they gave him a cartoon. He did many, many episodes of The Smurfs, looked like 86 episodes per IMDb. And then he did 29 episodes of DuckTales, the series, going into this film. He later went on to direct episodes of the Aladdin cartoon, the Jumanji cartoon, and the Boondocks. Those all jumped out at me as notable projects that he'd worked on. The writer was Alan Burnett, who had done The Smurfs. He had done many episodes of DuckTales. He wrote the acclaimed Batman Mask of the Phantasm and a lot of the other DC animated shows, like Batman animated series, Superman animated series, Batman Beyond, Static Shock, and most recently he has done a handful of the Justice League animated projects. So I like looking at seeing his name pop up there. I was like, oh, good pedigree there, Alan Burnett over at DC Animation. Starring, you have Alan Young playing Scrooge McDuck. He had been a regular on the Mr. Ed TV show from the 1960s, which I saw many, many episodes of growing up with Mr. Ed being on Nick at Night at the time. He started playing Scrooge McDuck in the 1983 Mickey's Christmas Carol, which it's another one that we had in the big puffy Disney VHS tapes and would watch all year round, but especially at Christmas time. That was kind of one of our go-tos for the Christmas Carol story growing up. And he played Scrooge McDuck all the way up through his passing in 2016 at the age of 96, including in, this jumped out at me, he was Scrooge McDuck in Kingdom Hearts Birth by Sleep. So shout out to Alan Young there, and his lifetime as Scrooge McDuck, which has since been taken over by, of course, David Tennant on the new series. You have Terrence McGovern playing Launchpad. I'm pretty sure the cast here was like in order of speaking role or whatnot. But Terrence McGovern played Launchpad. He's a notable character actor with 138 credits to his name, including some games in recent years like The Wolf Among Us and 2064 Read Only Memories, which was a game I really enjoyed a few years back. You have Russi Taylor, who plays Huey, Dewey, Louie, and Webby. Very prolific Disney talent, if you're familiar with kind of Disney history. She was, of course, notably the voice of Minnie Mouse, and she was married to Wayne Allwine, who voiced Mickey Mouse for many, many years. She passed away in 2019, but voiced Huey, Dewey, and Louie in Kingdom Hearts 3, if you played that. She'd also done, outside of Disney, she was Martin Prince for The Simpsons for many, many years. So very iconic voice talent there. You have Richard Libertini, who plays Dijon, the kind of like henchman sidekick of the big bad here that we'll get to in a second. When I get into how does this hold up, he's probably the weakest element because it feels very much like a dated stereotypical kind of voice for that character. But he was a character actor, 120 credits to his name, including he had done the Fletch movies. That jumped out at me. You have probably one of the biggest names of the film here, especially for the time this was coming out, Christopher Lloyd playing Murloc, the big bad, who of course had done Taxi in the, I want to say, 70s. He'd done Clue, he was Professor Plum in Clue. Of course, most notably, and around this time, Doc Emmett Brown in the Back to the Future trilogy, because the Back to the Future 3 would have come out earlier this year in 1990, earlier before this had come out. He would then go on to play Uncle Fester in the Addams Family movies. He was in one of my cult classic favorites that I was thinking about not too long ago that I really want to go back and watch, a movie called Camp Nowhere, about a bunch of kids who basically don't want to go to fat camp or computer camp or whatever other camps that their parents are trying to send them to. So instead they create their own camp and pool their parents' money, and they bring in Christopher Lloyd's character as kind of the camp counselor to be the actor for all and be like the authority figure. And he's basically he's the con man that sells all the parents on the different camps that they take the kids to. So I very much loved that movie a lot growing up as well. So shout out to Christopher Lloyd doing that. He even came back and voiced Emmett Brown in the Telltale Back to the Future games, which are canonically kind of within the Back to the Future universe, and have the blessing of Bob Gale and Bob Zemeckis. They famously talk about how there's never how over their dead bodies will you see a Back to the Future reboot, but they did kind of authorize and give credence to the Telltale story that came out back. I want to say that was 2 games before The Walking Dead, because it was Back to the Future and then the Lost World Jurassic Park game, and then Telltale took off with The Walking Dead after the fact, and Back to the Future game, because of my love of that series, was my first exposure to Telltale, really. You can definitely see that Walking Dead was where they started hitting their prime, but Back to the Future game, real good, especially if you're a fan of that series. And then most recently, one of the things that jumped out is Christopher Lloyd took over the role of Master Xehanort in Kingdom Hearts 3 Reminds DLC. So if anybody played that earlier this year, they might have recognized that familiar voice. And then lastly, rounding out kind of the cast for this segment, you have Rip Taylor here as the genie. Very distinct Vegas comedian, known for shooting confetti everywhere. It was kind of his whole shtick. And then he's got a very, boisterous, over the top, kind of raspy-ish voice that is unmistakable. And played himself in many, many, many things over the years until he passed away late last year. I want to say October of last year is when he passed away. A little bit of trivia for this film. This was the first Disney animated movie to be spun off from a television series. Specifically, it was the first of 2 films released by the Disney Movie Tunes studio, with the other one being a Goofy movie, our very first That D Plus Show episode. There were originally plans to have films based on Chip 'n Dale Rescue Rangers and Goof Troop following this film. However, the film performed below expectations at the box office, so the Chip 'n Dale film was scrapped, and the Goof Troop movie was repurposed into the standalone film, A Goofy Movie. Side characters from DuckTales, like Gyro Doofus, Bubba the Cave Duck, and Gizmo Duck, are absent, as the filmmakers didn't want to confuse newcomers who have not seen the Disney afternoon cartoon. This is also why none of the show's villains, like the Beagle Boys, Magica Dispel, and Flintheart Glomgold, are also absent from the film. You have this also being Christopher Lloyd's first time voice acting in a theatrically released animated film. Later, he would go on to voice titular character in The Pagemaster, as well as Rasputin in Anastasia, the coroner in Hey Arnold the Movie, and Hovis the Rat in The Tale of Despero, 2008. So yeah, some little fun facts there. There was also one. There seemed to be like two contradictory, or not contradictory, but basically there was a little trivia note saying this is only the second Disney film released that was not a musical, following The Black Cauldron. So that jumped out, and then there was like another piece of trivia that was like, oh, this is the third one. And I don't remember what the other one that it wasn't including, but it was like this is only the third one without music. I think is how it described itself or something like that. I don't remember, but so that's why I didn't really pull those ones in, because they seem to be at odds with one another. So how does this movie hold up? I think it holds up fine. It is very much a stereotypical genie in the lamp kind of story that you would see. It surprises me that this was theatrically released, given its pedigree as a TV series. I could have very easily seen this as just direct to VHS at the time, or just like a multi-part episode, especially because the film itself seems to be kind of broken out into segments. There is kind of the like, let's go and get the lamp episode that could be a standalone episode, and then you have kind of the kids playing with the lamp and meeting the genie, and then you have like Scrooge getting the lamp and his battle with Christopher Lloyd's character kind of maybe being the third episode, or maybe I guess an hour and 14 minutes would probably be 4 episodes there, so it'd be like Scrooge taking the genie's power to like Scrooge getting the genie's power, and then finally kind of the end battles with everything tying together would probably be like the 4-part episode that you would have of this in this day and age. But it's fine. Like I said, in the casting portion, the character of Dijon is very ethnically questionable in how his like the dialect and whatnot, that he's being a very over the top kind of Middle Eastern character to be the supporting baddie in this. So like that, I was like, oh, that doesn't ring true or ring the right way. And then I think just because Rip Taylor is such a like persona from the 80s, that I feel like he feels out of place if you were trying to watch this with a modern lens. But as somebody who like remembered that character, and the genie trying to basically pass himself off as a duck to hide from Scrooge and whatnot in there. Like he also very clearly sounds like a very old man compared to the kids who are all having their kid voices, but he's supposed to be a very young duck or whatever. I think that bends the ideas of reality, but whatever. It's still I think it was still fun. I think there's some fun action in there, and I think it's fun. One of the things that you don't get in something like Aladdin a few years later is you get all of the kids basically having their turn with the genie, and you see all the wild things that they would wish for, like giant ice cream sundae or whatever. So I think there's like that's an extra little fun element, seeing kind of what these kids would go crazy for, like Webby wanting an elephant, and the genie basically saying, "Oh, big wishes equal big problems," and all that stuff. So I think it holds up, but you have to recognize that this was a movie that spawned from a TV show, like a Saturday afternoon cartoon or something like that. That I think, just viewing it through that lens, I think it's still fine. And this is one of the things that I love about, and we will talk about, I'm sure, at length in a future modern DuckTales series is that I love how distinct each of the kids is. Dewey, Louie, and Huey get a lot more like credit there, whereas in this old series they were all treated as like one, and the fact that all three of them and Webby are voiced by the same person, I think kind of helps fuel that, and that they're all completely interchangeable characters. So that's something that I appreciate that the new series tries to address and remedy that. Favorite moments that I have, I think I like I touched on. I really like the sequences of the kids making their wishes, and I remember, especially as a kid, thinking how cool the genie is when he's pretending to be a kid, because he had his backward hat and he's skateboarding around the place and stuff. And then I think also this, like, Christopher Lloyd being cast in this with his kind of, maniacal kind of voice, especially as a fan of the Anastasia film that would come out from Fox a few years later. I think this did a great job kind of setting the stage. I think he's got a great voice for animated work, and he got to really sink his teeth in the villain role here. And I liked that the villain, had this magic amulet that gave him unlimited wishes, and that the amulet kind of also lets him turn into different animals. And I like how the kind of the resolution of the film, where he's basically like turning the Scrooge McDuck's money bin into this like weird, like alien type of like flying fortress, and the kids basically, or Scrooge basically, is able to defeat him by knocking the amulet out of his hand. So he's no longer like a giant bird talon thing, and he just turns back into a normal human. So I thought it was a kind of a clever way of writing around that, and Scrooge gets to make like the wish to restore everything as it was before he plummets to the earth. So yeah, I enjoyed it. I think those are some of my favorite moments of the film. But like I said, the least favorite wise, I would say Dijon is a little potentially racially insensitive in the portrayal of that character, especially in the context that the actor playing him is, I think, like Italian or something like that. So it's like probably didn't need to go so hard into that kind of voice direction, but 1990 was a different time and less PC all around, I suppose. In terms of a grade, I would give this, I think a B minus. I think it does a good job. Kind of, I like that. Like in the trivia says, it is trying to be an isolated adventure. So you're not, diving into or being sidetracked by the other villains of the DuckTale universe, or even some of the other characters. Like, it is limited to basically the McDuck family and Launchpad, and then you have like the butler and Miss Beakley and stuff like that. But it is very much like a self-contained story, so I can appreciate that I didn't have to remember characters from the original series necessarily when I was hopping back into this one. So yeah, a B plus I think is I'm sure it's a very generous grade, but there's certainly a sense of nostalgia to this one for me as well. A little bit of extra credit for you. Other suggestions if you like this one. The suggestions that Disney Plus provides are, of course, the 1987 DuckTales series, the 2017 DuckTales series, the 2017 DuckTales shorts, Darkwing Duck, Quack Pack, Disney's Mickey Mouse, which is kind of a modern Mickey animated cartoon, which is another one that I've had somebody reach out and wants to discuss with me. So look forward to hopping into that here. The Three Musketeers, with Mickey, Donald, and Goofy as the Three Musketeers. Basically, from that era of Disney just taking public domain stories and putting their characters into it, like the aforementioned Christmas Carol. And then lastly, rounding out the top 8 that Disney Plus provides, you have The Three Caballeros, which I remember that's another one I loved growing up, largely because of the music, and like my dad, who is named Don, was a huge Donald Duck fan, and anytime we go to Disneyland or something, like, we get him something Donald related. So Three Caballeros was one of the few Donald-centric films that we had. So we watched that a lot growing up, especially here in Arizona, with a very kind of Hispanic kind of heritage and culture around us. It was a nice little additional piece of Disney film, and I really appreciated, spoilers in the 2017 DuckTales conversation. I really appreciated how they brought in the Three Caballeros into an episode in there. Basically Donald getting his old band back together, and you had kind of the other characters show up in that. So Three Caballeros rounding out the extra credit portion. Extracurriculars, like I said, I've watched all of the 2017 DuckTales series that is out there, and I look forward to talking about that in a future episode. What else have I watched? I watched, following up on last week's episode with Cameron about Gravity Falls, I watched the rest of the first season of Gravity Falls, and I really enjoyed kind of where that story was going. So I still need to hop back over into to season 2 and watch that. And then, yeah, I might have just thrown some other stuff on the background. I guess I'm still watching Clone Wars as it comes out week over week. And yeah, that probably rounds out the extracurriculars. So yeah, that's going to do it for this week's episode of That D Plus Show. Thank you for joining me to listen to me talk about DuckTales the movie, the legend or treasure of the lost lamp. Just kind of a movie from my childhood that I wanted to spend some time celebrating and discussing here. You can follow me over at Trevor J. Starkey on Twitter. You can follow all of the latest from That Nerdy Site over at That Nerdy Site. If you would like to be on the show, so I'm not doing solo episodes of these because I really need to actually reach out and bring on the guests, you can go to thatnerdysite.com/D+guest and fill out the little form there. Let me know what Disney Plus offering you would like to chat about, be it a TV series, a movie like this. If you're going to do TV series, I will say kind of like come in with a few episodes in mind of what you'd want to talk about. Typically like the pilot episode and then maybe 1 or 2 other kind of highlight episodes you'd want to really focus on. But if you're doing a movie, we can talk about a movie. And if you want to do shorts like the Mickey Mouse one, we can kind of center around some specific shorts to discuss. So yeah, that's going to do it. If you like what you heard, please like, rate, review, subscribe, share with your friends, all that fun stuff. And as I said at the top, if you feel so inclined, you can always help support us on Patreon at patreon.com/thatnerdysite. But don't worry about it right now. If you can't, we totally understand with everything going on in the world. Times are tight. Gotta keep money a little close to the chest. Totally understandable. No worries there. Thank you for joining me. As always, stay nerdy, be good to each other, and class dismissed.